I knew when I agreed to write the textbook that I was going to end in a discussion of social movements. And the reason for that is two or threefold. The first reason is that when you ask someone what they think about when you mention public speaking, often Martin Luther King's "I Have a Dream" speech people will mention, or other significant political, sociocultural speeches, and that's the highest of the highest bar for public speaking, right? So it has to be mentioned because it's what most people think of when you talk about oratory. But I didn't want it to go first. I wanted it to go last because I wanted to build up to it. I wanted students to focus most on their own lives and their own communities. And as the book progresses, we can think about more wider and wider audiences, particularly online audiences, which we have to contend with now, and which students are contending with on a daily basis. So that was the first reason, is like I had to. The second is that in communication studies, and in particular the more critical humanities end of the studies, a lot of instructors are advocates for particular causes or activists. Some of my best friends are activists, right? I've done a little activism myself, but I wanted to acknowledge that dimension of public speaking that's happening, and advocacy, working inside the system in order to create social change, but also activism is acknowledging that it's coming from the outside and pushing for change within. I think just that's important as a value to discuss and to acknowledge that there are people in the field that do these kinds of things. A number of my friends work on prison reform, right? A number of them work on abolishing capital punishment. And so they're kind of activist scholars or scholars activists. And I wanted to acknowledge those folks are important to the field, and they have been ever since it started forming in the 19-teens and 1920s. Communication studies pioneered the teaching of speaking as a form of new citizenship. In communication studies introduced speaking programs to high schools. And Texas was one of the first states in which Edwin Dubois Schroeder started the Interscholastic League doing precisely that. So the field has always been involved in a kind of activist approach to culture. And so that was another reason I thought it was important to stick in there. And finally, it's important to keep in there, given the cultural events of the past many years, especially with an awareness of Black Lives Matter, the Me Too movement, and the wave of anti-trans legislation that's sweeping across the country. We live in a time in which we're speaking for social change and advocating for social change more than I can ever remember in my lifetime. I was born in '73, so I missed many of the activist struggles over civil rights in the '60s and to some extent the '70s. I didn't have political consciousness until the '80s myself. So given that context, given my experience, I just think that we live in a pretty precarious, challenging time. And I think it's helpful and hopefully comforting to students to read about how social change works and public speaking's role in that process.